snowy night and this great, beautiful, classic, retro winter of all time. I am enjoying more than I can even begin to say. I wasn't just cross-country skiing in Lake Placid. I raced 25 kilometers this morning, so if I keel over in the middle of this talk in sheer exhaustion, that's why. It really has been a wonderful winter. We're almost the only place in the globe that's enjoying it. January was the second warmest January ever recorded on this planet, as you know. 2014 was the hottest year for which we have records. Believe it or not, though it's been very cold here, even in the continental US so far this winter, we've had about 3 times as many high temperature records as cold temperature records, because the western United States and Alaska are unbelievably warm. And as you know as well, drought ridden, and you know, so we should, when it crosses your mind to complain about the fact that it's 15 below, when you wake up in the morning, don't, would be my advice. I won't talk but for a minute about the trouble that we're in, because I know that mostly we know it. Truthfully, I got to say, I'm very glad to be here, and really the reason that I said, I don't normally anymore talk that much around Vermont, just because my theory is that there are other places that need it more. And people in Vermont more or less know what the problem is, more or less know what needs to be done, and I know that's true of people in this room, so you forgive me. But I wanted to come to Goddard just as a way of saying thanks for joining in this divestment fight. This is a special place, and that was a special thing to do, to join Green Mountain College and Sterling College and all the other colleges and universities and denominations and things around the world that have joined that fight, and we're awfully grateful for it. I won't talk but a minute about the trouble we're in, but the trouble is substantial. When I wrote The End of Nature, now 26 years ago, we didn't know how fast climate change would come, and it came faster and harder than we suspected. If someone had said 25 years ago that most of the summer sea ice in the Arctic would be gone, we would have said, no, that's another 70, 80 years out. If someone had said, as the scientists demonstrated this time last year, that the West Antarctic ice sheet has now essentially become unmoored by melting at its base, we would have said, no, that's another 70, 80 years out. If someone had said the world's oceans would be 30% more acidic, we would have said, no one's even thought to measure 25 years ago the pH of the oceans, because we didn't even cross anyone's mind that you could change the chemistry of something as vast as the world's seas, but we have. And this, this is all incredibly sad and incredibly dangerous and incredibly unnecessary. Unnecessary because we knew 25 years ago what the problem was. I mean, it's not as if we didn't have warning. We did. The scientists told us, and with great unanimity, what we were up against and what to do about it. It's unnecessary because of that warning, and it's unnecessary because we have now the technology we need to get past it. There were days last summer when the Germans generated 80% of the power that they used from solar panels within their borders. Germany gets as much sunshine on average as Alaska, okay? So it's not natural resource endowment that's driving their success, it's political will. As of a year ago anyway, there were more solar panels in Bavaria than there were in the United States, okay? Even though we have Florida, and Texas, and Arizona, and New Mexico, and so on and so forth. The Danes last year generated 40% of their electricity from wind. The Danes have no monopoly on wind. It blows nearly everywhere, including here. We have the technologies we need to avert the greatest crisis that we ever faced. We haven't put them to use for the most part. The Germans and the Danes are great exceptions to the rule. We haven't put them to work, and at some point for me the question became, why? I assumed when I started writing about this 25 years ago that given the warning we would act, because that's what rational people and rational societies you would think would do. And we kept waiting and waiting. You know, every year panels of scientists would trot up to Capitol Hill and testify and explain what was going on. So, and nothing happened. We've had a 25-year bipartisan effort to accomplish nothing on this problem. And it's been highly successful. And at a certain point, too late really for me, I mean, I should have figured it out years before, but at a certain point it began to dawn on me and some others that this is because we weren't, how to say it, we weren't in an argument. We'd already won the argument. That was not the problem. We were winning the argument. We were just losing the fight because the fight wasn't being conducted on reason and data and whatever else. The fight was being conducted as fights usually are on power. And the fossil fuel industry is the richest industry in the history of the world. I mean, literally, the last 4 years, Exxon made more money than any company in the history of money. And though I try hard to be a patriot and not a cynic, in our political system and a lot of others, money buys you more influence than your arguments deserve. I hope that doesn't shock anyone by saying that, but I'm afraid that's the way that it is. And so we sort of, in a kind of inchoate way, began to sort of scratch our heads and say, what power can we muster that isn't, we're never going to outspend these guys, so what are the other options? And the only one that we could even begin to come up with was the kind of power, the kind of almost currency that you generate when you have movements, you know? Power of passion and spirit and creativity. Sometimes the willingness to spend one's body. And so, you know, haltingly and blunderingly, we sort of set to work. And since I live here, the first thing that we tried to do, we had a few friends, and I know there's people in this room who took part in that, was in 2006 we organized this march up the western side of Vermont along Route 7 for 5 days up to Burlington. And it was fun, you know, we slept in farm fields along the way, and you know, I'm a Methodist, so I called up the Methodist sort of mafia to make sure there'd be potluck suppers, you know, and things. This Methodist sacrament would be administered along the way. And by the time we got to Burlington, there's 1,000 people marching. So for Vermont, as you all know, that's a lot of people, you know, in one place at one time. You know, pretty much, I don't know, Thunder Road or something is pretty much the only place you get more people. I remember Bernie, who's, you know, greeting us, and of course Bernie, you know, sort of had roots in the protest era of the 60s, and he was so excited, and he was like, this is great, I haven't seen this many people in so long, this is so amazing, I'm so glad you did this, what is this about again? And he's since gone on to be the great champion on this issue in the whole Senate. An absolutely stand-up guy on this who's done everything he can to help and been tremendous on it. And boy, one hopes he not only runs for president, but somehow wins. You know, that would be a different world. But the thing about that 1,000 people was there was a story in the Free Press the next day. The story in the Free Press says, this was probably the largest demonstration about climate change that had yet taken place in the United States. We're like, no wonder we lose. You know, we have all kind of superstructure of a movement. We've got scientists and economists, and we got Al Gore, we got everything you need. The only part of the movement we forgot was the movement part. There's just nothing there to get it going. So that's what we tried to sort of put together. And in this case, when I say we, I mean me and 7 undergraduates at Middleburg. And we had no money and no lists or anything, which was probably all to the best, because it didn't occur to us that it was kind of a ludicrous folly to try and go and organize the world, you know. We just decided that we should try. And that's, by the way, the biggest reason why we picked this sort of odd name of 350.org. The references to the parts per million CO2 in the atmosphere that would be safe to have, a number we're already well north of, unfortunately. But the reason that we picked it was because when we thought about organizing the world, we thought forget lack of money, or we thought the most daunting challenge we could see was that everybody insists on speaking their own language, you know, so how are you going to organize everybody? So we figured a number would be better. Arabic numerals work the same everywhere. Everybody gets them, you know. So, hence 350.org. And since there were 7 undergraduates and 7 continents, each one picked one. The guy who picked the Antarctic also had to do the internet. And off we went. And our job was just to find other people like ourselves, you know. There's not everywhere something called an environmentalist, but there is everywhere somebody worried about hunger, about public health, about war and peace, about women's rights, about all the things that you're not going to have in a disintegrating world. And this world is already quickly disintegrating as a result of the rise in temperature. You know, we already see great droughts, crop shortfall, spread of disease, and that's with 1 degree rise in temperature Celsius. On current trajectories, we're headed for 4 or 5 degrees this century, and that means we can't have development. We can't even have sort of civilizations of the kind that we're used to. The agronomists tell us that from this point on, each degree increase in global average temperature should cut grain yields about 10%. So if you raise temperature 3 degrees, you got 1/3 fewer calories on the planet. You all know enough about the world to be able to figure out what that would mean for, you know, international relations, and you know, that's the recipe for just a horrible, horrible, horrible world. So that's why people all over the world quickly got engaged. We asked people. This was back 2009, and when we were starting, we said, let's do this big global day of action, and everybody on the same day all around the world come together and do this. And we didn't know it would work. We had no real reason to suspect it would, but we were hopeful. And we had the first sense that it might work. 2 days, it was supposed to happen on a Saturday, and that Thursday we were all sitting around our one-room office, around our table with the 8 of us with our laptops open, doing the last-minute stuff. And the phone rang, and it's our leader in Ethiopia. Like everybody else, was a volunteer, like a large majority of people was a she, and like many of them was 17 years old. And she was in tears. She said, the government took away our permit for Saturday, so we're doing this today before they can stop us, which was brave, but that's not why she was crying. She said, we so want to do it the same day as everybody else. We want to be part of the whole big thing. We don't want to spoil it. We're really sorry. And we've got 15,000 young people out in the street in Addis Ababa chanting 350. So we were like, well, don't worry about the date, it's okay. And you know, for the next 72 hours, these pictures just flooded in from all over the world. Actually, the next one came from U.S. troops in Afghanistan. I made a 350 with sandbags that were parking our Humvee for the weekend and walking. Okay, but the pictures just started coming in from every corner of the world, sometimes 30 and 40 a minute, because before the weekend was out, there had been 5,200 demonstrations in 181 countries. CNN called it the most widespread day of political activity in the planet's history. And this is all, as I say, sort of in some way emerged from Vermont, you know. What was most interesting to me and most moving was I'd always been told, you know, environmentalism is something that rich white people do If you worried where your next meal was coming from, you wouldn't be an environmentalist, on and on and on. Thank you, Catherine. And that just turns out to be nonsense. Most of the people we were working with around the world turned out to be black and brown and Asian and young and poor, because that's what most of the world is composed of. And they're every bit as interested in the world as anybody else, maybe more so, because if you're poor, you know, the future is bearing down hard on you right now. So great creativity and wit demonstrated in every corner of the globe, and wonderful involvement of religious leaders. That's the front of a huge multi-faith march about Cape Town. There's the head of Muslim South Africa, the head of kind of indigenous traditions behind them in the scarlet. Desmond Tutu's successor as Anglican Archbishop. There's our biggest evangelical college in this country. Billy Graham's alma mater, a place where there would not have been an environmental demonstration even a few years before this. I've been to the Holy Land, as they say, to do a little bit of organizing. I've been to Bethlehem. We convened a meeting, but it was extremely hard because there's all these military checkpoints and things. But the Dead Sea is falling rapidly as planet warms. So people wanted to do something. So the Jordanians said, we'll make the big 3 on our beach. The Palestinians said, we'll take care of the 5 in Palestine. The Israelis said, we'll do the 0 over here. Got a lot of coverage because, you know, for once, people setting aside kind of their ongoing strife to focus on the larger problems that unite us. And the same all over the world. 300 demonstrations in China. Those are our brothers and sisters in the Maldives. Wonderful, wonderful people, a Muslim nation. Culture goes back 5,000 years. The odds that it'll make it to 5,100 are pretty small because the highest point in this huge archipelago in the Indian Ocean that straddles the equator, the highest point's about 1.5 meters above sea level, which is not a good place to be in the 21st century. But that's why they're holding their student government meeting in the lagoon to kind of demonstrate the problem all over the world. This was the biggest story on Google News for about 36 hours. More things linking to it than anything else. And I think it's because people didn't look the way that editors thought that environmentalists are supposed to look. Like there's Yemen, which is a very tough place. All the women in that 0 are all in full black burqa, you know. So to us, they don't look like members of the Sierra Club or whatever, but they are. Their hearts are in the same place. They're thinking about, not about themselves, but about the future, about what the world's going to be like for their kids, you know, so on and so forth. And it was really powerful to watch, and watch everywhere. I mean, there's the oil-rich sheikhdom of Abu Dhabi, and you can see some oil-rich sheikhs down front in their dish-dashes, but wiser than some of their brethren, because behind them you see the edge of the largest solar array on the planet, you know. These guys will probably figure out a way to stay rich no matter what. There were 400 or 500 pictures that ended up in a file marked 350 adorable. And they were adorable, and they were also hard to look at because, I don't know, the eyes of that girl in the middle always swaying me. I mean, these kids are probably going to be refugees in their lifetime. And not for anything they did, for stuff that we did. So we've gone all night, all week, because we think we've sort of organized, or at least controlled, about 20,000 demonstrations now around the world in every country except North Korea. And they've been beautiful, and they come from places, you know, I'd never heard of before, or places that I'd heard of but for other reasons, and, you know, it just couldn't be more beautiful. We love doing this kind of work. We've done these huge art projects they described as the biggest art project in the planet's history, because there were so many bodies of people making this art that we've had to borrow satellites to take pictures of a lot of them, you know. That scarab beetle is pushing solar panels across the desert there. This was actually my favorite from that day. It's one of these dry riverbeds in the southwest now in this kind of mega drought. But when the satellite went over, 3,000 or 4,000 people there in the middle put blue blankets up overhead, and for a second the river come back to life. You know? So the truth is, if I had my druthers, this is if I really had my druthers, I wouldn't do any of this. You know, I'd stay home and write because that's what I like to do. And as you can tell by listening to me speak, I'm not a orator or activist by nature or inclination or whatever. But even if I were doing this, if I had my druthers, we'd do this kind of education, and we would do the work of education and slowly spread these ideas, and within a generation or two, people would fully get it, and we'd be where we needed to be, and we'd have this kind of slow, peaceful, interesting evolutionary change that humans are best with, and so on. But of course, the problem is we don't have 50 years. I mean, if we'd had half a grain of sense, we would have started 25 years ago. We're way behind, and so along with education, we also have to do a certain amount of confrontation. And that's what we've been doing too, and a lot of you have been engaged in things like this fight about the Keystone Pipeline. When we started in 2011, no one thought there was any chance of blocking it. The National Journal, the kind of insider newspaper in DC, polled its 300 energy experts in Washington, and 91% of them said that TransCanada would have its permit by the end of 2011. They don't have it yet, and which is good. It means we've kept 800,000 barrels of oil a day in the ground, of the dirtiest oil on earth. And last summer, even before the price of oil began to drop, without a pipeline to use, 3 big investors pulled $17 billion back and from expansion plans up there, stopping mines that, had they been built, would have been the equivalent of about 700 coal-fired power plants worth of carbon. And sort of, well, more to the point, there's now good opposition to fossil fuel sort of going on everywhere around the world. That's because, 1,200 people showed up at the beginning of this Keystone fight and went to jail. And that was enough to get things rolling. For the first time, we've been able to really block a big piece of fossil fuel infrastructure, despite the fact that it became the great rallying cry of the oil industry. I mean, Mitt Romney said in his first campaign commercial in the general election that his first thing he would do as president of the United States was approve the Keystone Pipeline. He went on to say, I thought sort of charmingly, that if he had to, he would build it himself. Which is, it's sort of hard to imagine the kind of aide who would be delegated to sort of show him which end of the shovel went in the ground. And you saw this Republican Congress spent the first 2 weeks of their new term in office trying to pass the Keystone. Not because, for 2 reasons. One, because it's become a great symbol and it's helped foment all this resistance to a zillion other things. And 2, because the Koch brothers are the biggest leaseholders in the tar sands. And if this thing gets built, the one study I've seen showed that they would add $100 billion to their already taken together the richest man on earth. Okay? That's why they announced recently they're going to spend $900 million on the next federal election. They'll spend more than the Republicans or the Democrats. Koch brothers, party of 2, because these are really high stakes. So, as I said, great fights going on everywhere, including Vermont, where people are standing up to gas pipelines and things like that. We're starting to win some wonderful victories, and again, unexpected. 3 or 4 years ago, nobody thought that Andrew Cuomo would be forced to ban fracking in New York State, and in the weeks since that happened, Wales and Scotland have banned it, so did Tasmania last week, the French have banned it, out west, we're fighting hard and with great success so far against these plans to build huge coal ports on the Pacific coast to take coal out of the center of the country and send it overseas up in Canada, led by the indigenous people who've been at the forefront of these fights all along. They've been able to block so far all the other kind of pipelines out of the tar sands. In Australia, we're fighting like hell to beat back plans for the largest coal mine on the planet. I mean, it's good, but there's a limit to how much progress you can make just playing defense, so that's why we try and play offense too. And offense in this case being this divestment thing is a good example. It sort of got going. There was a little group of financial analysts in London who wrote a kind of obscure report that they went and looked up, something we should have done a long time ago. How much, they went and looked at all the SEC filings and annual reports and things for all the fossil fuel companies. And they asked the question, how much carbon do these guys have in their reserves? And it turns out that in their proved reserves, the stuff that they've told their shareholders and their banks that they're going to dig up and burn, the stuff that their share values are based on, they have a lot of carbon. They have 5 times as much as scientists say would be necessary to take us past the threshold of just completely out of control, catastrophic climate change. Which, if you think about it, it's a very amazing thing. If these guys carry out their business plan, then the planet tanks. There is no if, and, or but about it. It's just math. They have 2,900 gigatons worth of carbon. We can burn about another 500 gigatons. So it's astonishing if you think of it, that they put down on paper plans about that spell out the end of the world as we know it. So, some of us, a couple of us, really might, in certain ways, my friend Naomi Klein and I talking about this, maybe we should do this divestment thing like people did a generation ago about apartheid in South Africa. And I wrote a piece for Rolling Stone that became the most widely shared piece in their history, just laying out this new math. And then people went to work and really, all over the world, got behind this divestment thing. And, colleges all over the place, from Stanford to Sydney to Scotland, I'm trying to alliterate here, to Sweden. Religious denominations, the Unitarians, the United Church of Christ, the World Council of Churches, a lot of Anglican dioceses. Maybe the real high point came last September, the day of that big climate march in New York. Some of you were there in New York? Oh, yeah. I'll show you a couple pictures of them. In fact, let me see if I can thumb through and find them here, because they're worth seeing. These are just endless pictures of more and more demonstrations. The big climate march in New York last year was by far the largest demonstration about climate in history. And in fact, the largest demonstration about anything in this country in quite a while. And it was beautiful to see. Just amazing. I mean, the spirit of it was really great. One of the best things about it, I gotta say, was that there were no speeches at it. They just came and marched, except that at noon, everybody fell silent for a minute in sort of memory of the people who've already died as a result of climate change, and I guess in kind of anticipation of those who will. And then after a minute, this wave of sound started from, the thing at this point was about 5.5 miles long, so it started up someplace on Central Park West and just swept down 6th Avenue. These people, they said, you gotta sound the climate alarm, make as much noise as you can, and it was, as it swept down towards Times Square, it was just like a physical entity, just like this wall of sound. It was amazing. But that night, up in at the Cathedral of St. John the Divine, at the end of this conference of clerics on climate change, which was good in and of itself, but at the end, the heirs to the Rockefeller fortune stood up and announced that they were divesting from fossil fuel. Okay. which if you think about it, it's pretty amazing. It is like the first family of fossil fuel, you know, this was the original oil fortune. And they said, we no longer think that this is moral to be invested in, and we don't think it's wise either. Financially, we think if John D. Rockefeller were alive today, he'd be investing in clean, renewable energy, because that's what the future is. And they're right. I mean, it's already clear that, you know, for the last 5 years, for instance, you know, portfolios without fossil fuel in them have way outperformed the stock market and whatever else. And it's only going to get worse, you know, if we ever do anything about climate change, if we ever try to meet even the very paltry international targets we've already kind of agreed on. HSBC, the second biggest bank in the world, calculated last year that you'd have to cut the valuations of all the fossil fuel companies in half. That is, there's a huge carbon bubble. This reserves that we can't burn constitute stranded assets. They're kind of a bubble, the way that all those houses that there was no one to buy became a bubble, you know, 7 or 8 years ago, and almost brought down the economy. Well, this is on an even larger scale. So, places like Goddard are acting with the wisdom of Rockefellers in this case, you know, which does raise the interesting question of why on earth the state of Vermont has so far not gone along with this and divested its own holdings. It's a great shame and disgrace that it hasn't. And if you guys felt like doing something that would be helpful, it would be to write a letter to the governor asking him to do it. He said at one point that he thought it was a good idea, and then he said a few days later that he wasn't, you know, who knows, we need more investigation, whatever. That seems to be our thing now in Vermont, is we just take an extremely long time to do anything, even things that are easy and obvious like this, you know. And so if you'd be willing to goose him a little bit on this, that would be a very useful thing to do. Rob Kidd from the Sierra Club's here. Rob, if you're going to write to the governor, what's the zip code?
05602.
05602. Peter Shumlin, Montpelier, Vermont, 05602 should do it.
Oh yeah. The Pavilion Building.
Yeah, you know, it would be a good thing for Vermont to demonstrate some leadership here. A really good thing.
S8.
Say again? S8, that's the Senate bill that Anthony Polina has introduced that would do this, and I think Willem Jewett has introduced one in the House as well. So it's, you know, but it's, as I said, I mean, Montpelier sometimes drives me nuts. I have no idea why we bother electing Democratic supermajorities in both houses of our state legislature if they then aren't going to act on even things like this. It's a great shame, and it's time for them to, at least on this, demonstrate less passivity and more engagement. That's a little more sermonizing than I'm used to doing, but what the heck. It's probably a good place to end in a sense. Well, let me just show you a couple more pictures, because something went on that same time as that day in New York. There were 2,600 things around the world. The biggest was in New York, but all over the place people were doing it. And then the next day we went down and did sort of civil disobedience on Wall Street, and that was cool. But by far the coolest thing, even cooler than New York, cooler than anything, was what was going on in the Pacific. These are our friends at 350 Pacific. On each of the, it's about a dozen island nations that are not going to exist by the end of the century on our current path. Places like Vanuatu, or Micronesia, or the Marshalls, or Niue, or places that are just really low to the water, disappearing. But these are places with very ancient cultures. And so they've taken as their slogan, one I really like: "We are not drowning, we are fighting." Okay. And last summer they went and carved in each of these islands their own traditional canoe. They'd fell a tree and make one of these big outrigger canoes from it, whatever the local design was. And last fall, while we were in New York, they took them down to the largest coal port in the world, which is in Newcastle in Australia, and put them in the water and paddled out, and for a day they managed to blockade the harbor. The biggest ships in the world, these coal ships going out of there, had to turn around because these guys in the canoe. And it was beautiful symbolism, but it was also powerful politics. About 3 weeks ago, this is in the area where they want to build this largest coal mine on Earth. A coal mine that, among other things, would mean wrecking a large part of the Great Barrier Reef to kind of build a thing. Not that we're not already, I mean, the Great Barrier Reef is not going to be there in 50 years anyway because we're heating and acidifying the ocean in such a pitch, but this is just a kind of express method to get rid of it. Well, 3 weeks or 4 weeks ago, the people of Queensland in Australia turned out the Conservative government that had been planning all this, and this was one of the big issues. This is starting to catch fire there too. Starting to catch fire everywhere. Let me just end by saying, just sort of remembering back to since we're kind of at the crux of this Keystone thing now, sometime in the next few weeks we're expecting the decision. I've been thinking some about the origins of it, and reporters keep calling me to ask and things. And there's two things I remember about. I spent 2 weeks in Washington helping coordinate all this civil disobedience once I got out of jail myself after a few days. And there's two things I remember about. One, I'll tell you, looking at the age distribution, the demographic in this room, okay? Since there's a lot of people with hair the same color as mine. One of the things we said, when I wrote the letter asking people to come get arrested, which is not an easy kind of letter to write, one of the things I said was, I think in this case, college students should not have to be the cannon fodder for this thing. I mean, young people have led this fight, are leading this fight all over. But if you're, 19 and in college or whatever, probably an arrest record, not the best thing for your resume, in our current climate. One of the few completely unmixed blessings about growing older is, past a certain point, what the hell are they going to do to you? And so it was very good to see a lot of people of a certain age descend on Washington. Now, when people are getting arrested, we did not say, how old are you? Because that would be rude. But we did, cleverly, I think, say, who was president when you were born? And the two biggest pillars were from the Roosevelt and the Truman administrations. On the last day, there was a guy, 97 or something, arrested, a sign around his neck that said, World War II vet, handle with care. He'd been born in the Warren Harding administration, which was so long ago, I'd forgotten there was a Warren Harding administration. So that was good. It was really good for all the young people who were there, because they got to see their elders acting like elders for once, the way that in a working society elders act, which was good. The other thing we told people was, if you want to come get arrested, would you please put on a necktie or wear a dress? Not because, look, I live in Ripton, which is just about as formal as Plainfield, if I could go a year at a time without putting on a necktie, my wife has to remind me how you knot it, when the time comes. But we wanted to make the point that there's nothing, visually, that there's nothing at all radical about what we're talking about. In fact, just the opposite. If you think about what we're saying, it's that we'd like the world to remain, as much as possible, resembling the one that we've had for the last 10,000 years, this period that scientists call the Holocene, a period we've now left behind. We've raised the temperature enough to go beyond it, but every human being that we know, for whom we have records, lived during this Holocene. And so it's not radical, it's, if you think about it, extremely conservative in the kind of old Vermont conservative kind of way to say, don't change this fundamental thing. any more than we have to. In fact, if you think about it, radicals work at oil companies. If you're willing to make your great fortune by getting up in the morning and altering the chemical composition of the atmosphere, and you're willing to do it not just after scientists have told you what will happen, but after you've seen what would happen. If you're the sort of person who watches the Arctic melt as a result of climate change, and your first impulse is then to go make plans to drill in those now open waters for yet more oil, then you are a radical on a scale of radicalism we've never seen. I mean, nothing, anybody in the 60s ever did comes close to that as radical. And our job, it seems to me, is to check that radicalism as best we can. I cannot guarantee we're going to win this fight. I don't know. We waited a long time to get started, and as I said at the beginning, I should have figured out long before what we should be doing. We waited a long time to get started, and the physical momentum of climate change is very large. And there are scientists who think it may already be sort of spiraling out of control. We're clearly not going to stop global warming, but we probably still have the ability to keep it from getting worse than it has to get. And that's the great task of our time. And if I can't guarantee a victory, the one thing I can guarantee you, because I've been all over the world spewing carbon behind me to kind of organize these last years, the one thing I can guarantee you is that there's going to be a fight, a hell of a fight everywhere. And we need you. I'm so grateful to you all for already being in that fight, and just look forward to standing shoulder to shoulder with you in it. Thank you all very much. Oregon things work pretty well. But I can say I don't spend an immense amount of time worrying about sort of climate denialists and that kind of thing. Their influence is, is fairly marginal in one sense. 80% of Americans now understand what's going on. And understand their influence rests not on their arguments, it just rests on the fact that they come with, they own one political party and they've terrified the other, the fossil fuel industry. So I just worry more about why more of that 80% that does know what's going on isn't engaged and active. And that's where I spend most of my time trying to get people engaged. But it's a good point. I'll also say that one of the things that I've been always believed, and I think is proven to be true, is that people, in fact, are perfectly able to comprehend and deal with the science of this. When we started 350.org, a lot of people said, oh, it's much too complicated a name, no one will understand it, it's a scientific data point. Well, you've seen pictures from all over the world, including lots of places with lots of people who are, quote, illiterate, unquote. It's actually the easiest thing in the world. Here's a number, we have too much of it, The other thing people said was it's too depressing since we're already past it. It'll depress everyone if you call it this. I was like, I don't think that's true either. I think it's the equivalent of like going to the doctor and the doctor says, you're in that zone. I just looked at your cholesterol and you're in that zone where people have heart attacks and I think you might have had a little stroke already. That's the day when people say like, okay, what pill do I take now? That's when behaviors start to change. Only complete idiots, only real wonks demand from the doctor like a full lecture on the lipid system, before you'll take action. And only real dummies go home and search the internet until they find a website that says cholesterol doesn't exist, or whatever. So I think most people are largely there, and the ones who aren't, are ideologically motivated, not scientifically motivated, and you're not going to convince your brother-in-law at Thanksgiving about this if he's spent the last 25 years marinating in Rush Limbaugh. It's not possible. So don't worry about it. Enjoy the meal, and the next day organize and organize and organize.
Bill, two things. Beth Pierce is the treasurer in Vermont. She is actually an elected official.
Why am I not seeing where you are?
That's Dan Jones.
She's an elected official, and she can actually do what she wants with the state funds, and the governor can't do much about it. So if people wanted to get in touch with Beth Pierce, that might make more of a difference.
Well, that's true. One should write her, but it's also worth pointing out that she got her job because Peter Shumlin appointed her to it originally. And my sense in political terms is that sometimes, I mean, when we've been dealing with this Keystone stuff, for instance, it was incredibly annoying. It's incredibly annoying. Every time Congress votes on it, you can predict with unerring accuracy how they're going to vote based on how much money they've taken from the fossil fuel industry. It's like even better predictor than party idea. So it's so frustrating. At a certain point, we've just sort of started saying, in regard to the fossil fuel industry in Congress, like, we no longer really care that much about talking to the person behind the cash register at the front of the store. We need to go back and cause trouble for the owner, in the back office, the fossil fuel industry. Peter Shumlin doesn't own Beth Pierce, but Peter Shumlin and Beth Pierce would both be good people to write to, because there's some political power in that office up there on the second floor or the third floor, wherever it is, the fifth floor that the governor hangs out. That would be good, but you're right.
The other thing I had to ask was, there seems to be a third rail of environmental politics in Vermont in terms of energy production, because if we're going to get rid of fossil fuel and maintain some kind of lifestyle, midwinter, there's not a lot of electric power produced by solar panels, but there seems to be a big confrontation as to whether there should be wind power, et cetera, in the state. Do you have anything you'd like to say about that?
Sure. I've said often that I look forward to the day, and I've told the people at Green Mountain Power this, when we get wind turbines up on top of Middlebury Gap at the Snowball, or up above where I live, and I hope they come soon. Not because it doesn't come without some environmental cost, it does. You got to put a piece of concrete on a ridgeline. But because this is not, there is absolutely no free lunch in this system. For a very long time, Vermont is free-ridden on other people's landscape, We get energy from Hydro-Quebec. They re-engineered an area the size of France. I've been up there to look at it. I mean, they reversed the flow of enormous rivers in order to accomplish that. Now that Vermont Yankees closed down, we're getting more of our power from gas, which means, go look at what's going on in Pennsylvania or the other places where people are getting fracked. The Kingdom Wind thing in January churned out a huge amount of power for here in Vermont. That's good. It's not perfect. Nothing's perfect. But given the crisis that we're in, it's a good thing. And I got to say, it's not just wind. It's, there's also now in this state a fair number of people who are beginning to say, oh, there's too many solar panels, I don't like to look at them, it interferes with, my sense of Vermont or whatever. I was incredibly happy to see in our newspaper, in the Addison Independent, Sabre Field, the landscape painter, write in and say, I like to look at these things. And they're keeping the landscape open. For some, we've adjusted our aesthetics to think that a field full of solar collectors called corn plants that you have to usually pour a lot of nitrogen on, which then leaks into the lake, is, a perfectly good use of things. Solar panels and windmills have to come in our mind's eye to look beautiful. Not only because they are, I think, beautiful, I think the breeze made visible up there is magnificent, but because when we look at them, we look at ourselves beginning to take responsibility. doesn't do any good to feel sorry for people in the Maldives or whatever it is if we're not willing to do some of these things. So that's, I know it's not always popular to say, but that's my sense of things.
Hi, excuse me. There's a group of scientists called the Arctic Methane Emergency Group, and in December of just last year, they held a press conference and they called for the immediate geoengineering on a massive scale to save the Arctic from melting. And I'm just curious to know what your take on that is. Do you think we're at that point?
So three things. One, my scientific guru this whole 25 years has been Jim Hansen at NASA. A scientist who's been proved right over and over and over again, sounded the first alarms about climate change, has done so much of the seminal work. Not only that, is a complete stand-up guy. He's gone to jail as often as I have, and sometimes in the same paddy wagon, and which always kills me. I don't mind. It's like, for me, it's sort of like the world is not a worse place if I spend a few days out of circulation, but it's absurd to take your smartest scientists in the world and instead of having them in the lab, have them locked up someplace. It just annoys the hell out of me each time it has to happen. But anyway, Jim says that that he thinks that the methane numbers are probably not as dire yet as a very small number of scientists are saying. Geoengineering is an attempt to stop it. Geoengineering means doing something else to the atmosphere in order to counteract the effects of carbon. The most common prescription is to put a lot of sulfur into the atmosphere. Having the carbon warms it, and then sulfur would block some of the incoming solar radiation and cool things down. A, there's no particular reason to think it would work. B, when we model it on computers, it has huge side effects, like, for instance, moving the monsoons off the Asian subcontinent, which is a bad idea for the couple of billion people who depend on those. Third reason not to do geoengineering as opposed to doing something about carbon is that it does nothing about what may turn out to be the single worst manifestation of this whole thing, which is the ongoing acidification of the oceans. Even if it wasn't raising the temperature at all, we'd have to get off carbon dioxide in short order because we're completely, look at a globe, we are an ocean planet. It is insane to change the pH of the ocean. But the fourth point is, we don't need bizarro technology, firing artillery shells full of sulfur into the upper atmosphere forever. We have the technology. We have solar panels. The price of solar panels has fallen 75% in the last 6 years. I was just down in a series of houses in Rutland that Green Mountain Power has done as e-homes. They move people out for a few days. They weatherize the hell out of the place. They put in these air source heat pumps. Put some solar panels on the roof. They finance it all through the electric bill, and people use so much less energy that their electric bill still goes down, even though they've added all this stuff to it. This is literally not rocket science, okay? It is the stuff that we know how to do and can do, and it's so crazy to think that as a kind of race we just throw up and say, this is too much trouble. Let's put some other stuff up in the atmosphere and see how that does. That's my sense. Right, and there. All right. Well, I'm grateful to you all. I'm very grateful to Goddard, as I said. The willingness of Goddard to step forward and divest, to join Green Mountain and Sterling and so many others in Vermont, that's a really good thing. And so Peter Shumlin, Beth Pierce, that would be good. And I promised that I would announce that there is a showing at the Green Mountain Film Festival on the 28th of March. of this movie, The Wisdom to Survive, which I'm afraid I may be in briefly. But not very much. I think there's a lot more other interesting people in it too, so you might want to go anyway. So just Green Mountain Film Festival, and we'll figure out about it.